Welcome everyone. I'm here to talk today about the accessible educational materials. It used to be called accessible instructional materials, but because instruction has changed in the digital age, we have really become more of an educational global experience. So we're going to take you through some of that. I'm not sure how many of you have a lot of background in education. All of you probably went to school, of course, but in terms of education law and education protocol and policy, that's what I'm going to cover, and hopefully it won't be as dry as that just sounded. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I taught for 20 years in the classroom, and I was 12 years as a principal. In one of the schools that I was a principal for 6 years, I was a principal of a newcomer school. So we had 24 languages and 900 students that spoke all these various languages, and most of them were people that did not speak any English at all coming into the program. The second program that I was a principal for was a year-round program with 9 special ed programs, and we also had the first inclusion program in our county. So since then, I have moved to the Department of Education, where I am now a consultant for assistive technology. And trying to keep up with that, I'm sure as all of you are aware, is a pretty full-time job in itself. So beginning, I wanted to start to give a kind of an overview in case there are some people that aren't familiar. Why do we even have these special needs? And because it's so costly and so cumbersome with laws and all kinds of things. So why did we do that? Well, we did that because of a law that was passed years ago called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. And I'm sure you've all heard that. Basically what it says is that everyone has the right to receive curricula, and that when they receive that curricula, it needs to be in an accessible format. So the instructional materials that are provided, that includes textbooks, workbooks, any kind of ancillary materials a teacher might be using, and nowadays it includes any video and or media products. So all of that has to be in an accessible manner. Typically they're using the universal design as the bar for accessibility. So for some populations, for example, students that are blind and cannot see a screen, another extra step has to be taken. But for the most part, universal design basically creates curricula in an accessible manner such that most people will be able to participate. The other thing that is involved with instructional materials is the law requires that these materials be delivered in a timely manner. And that means at the same time as the peers receive these books. Now that becomes a little problematic when you have some teachers, particularly now with Common Core in California, and I don't know if there's anybody attending from outside of the state, but if you are a Common Core teacher, which is everyone in our state of California, then your district may have provided you with some materials, but the reality is we have not even adopted any materials for the English Language Arts, which is now combined with the English Language Development Framework and Standards. And so teachers have to find their own materials. Now a district could have adopted a program, but I know a lot of teachers are contacting me and saying, I'm getting this stuff on the internet. How do I make it accessible for my students? And so it's important that we look at materials ahead of time so that we can provide for the students the accessible formats that they need. One of the things that was critical when we looked at accessibility is, do we really have all the students accounted for? There are some kids at every disability has its spectrum. There are high functioning and low functioning for every disability population. And so we have to make sure to be inclusive in ways that are meaningful to the people that are receiving that information. So child find and children with disabilities starts pretty much at birth. They now have testing at birth to determine if a student has a hearing impairment or is deaf, and they are immediately set up with organizations that help the parents facilitate how to get support for them. And then as they develop more and more different disability strategies and or tests to determine what the disability might be, we're finding an awful lot of kids going for earlier and earlier intervention. So autism, for example, is even diagnosed earlier than 18 months at sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't present itself so much later when there's a lot more communication and interaction involved, but they can diagnose much, much earlier. So it's a good thing, this child find situation, to make sure that all kids are covered. There are many populations, I know, and I don't know if you ever read the tome, the book Hawaii. It was like, I don't know, 1,400 pages. But in the state of Hawaii, before it was a state, any student or any child that was born with a deformity was drowned. And that is so unfortunate because there's some amazing people who just have challenges. They could be brilliant. They could be the next person that invents the next best thing. So we need to be inclusive of all people and be respectful of all people's challenges. One of the things that was set up when they reauthorized IDEA was that they said that we need to put in law the accessible materials, and we need to get the publishers on board. So they created the National Instructional Materials Accessibility or Access Center. I'm going to be going over that a little bit later, but I wanted to talk a little about some more laws first. But basically the idea is that the publishers give the materials to this center, and from that center, teachers can then provide accessible materials in a variety of digital formats for their students. The other thing that you have to know in California, and we are a little bit different than many of the states, is that we are a locally controlled state. That means every local education area has to have its own school board, and that school board determines the educational policy. There are some federal guidelines. You can't break the IDEA laws, for example, and there are some state guidelines that are called Education Code. But beyond that, there are local jurisdiction decisions. For example, 9th through 12th grade, local districts select all the materials. They do not go through a state adoption process. They go through a local adoption process, which is supposed to be on par with the adoption process for the K-8 materials. But it is the right of the local agency to determine what they want to purchase for the schools. In some cases, districts are saying, particularly now with Common Core, every school can find its own materials. In some cases, every teacher can find their own materials. There are still many districts that adopt district-wide so that they can have in-service training so the teachers are really fully aware of how the program works, so it benefits the students. But California is unique in it's one of the few states that has a local adoption. Some states adopt one math program and everyone in the state has that one program. To give an example, California did in the last math adoption, was just 2 years ago. They adopted 31 different publishers, and each of those publishers has materials. So there were over 10,000 accessible materials that needed to be placed into a different format in order for students to access it. Pretty overwhelming and costly, but the cost is not something that anyone should quibble with because it's the right of the student to be able to receive the curricula in an accessible format. One of the things that came about when they determined that all of these new digital formats are going to be available is who gets them. And so that's where I'm going to be heading for the rest of some of the laws is we're going to talk about what is the population. And I'm going to be going through a lot of education code. I'm going to go through them quickly because they are in the handout, and I hope you get a chance to access it. This is the same packet I send to teachers quite often to make sure that they are incorporating their justifications for purchase of assistive technology devices and or services for the students so that the students get everything that they deserve and need to be on par with their peers. So first of all, we determined that special education is a series of services and materials in a specialized manner that really help the individual meet their exceptional needs. Now, there's a lot of information if you look in Education Code 56000, but I try to whittle it down to just a sentence. Now, within special education, there is a population called low incidence population. Only 1% of the students in the state of California fall into the category of low incidence. It includes students who are blind, students who are deafblind, students who have low vision, students that are hearing impaired, students that are severely orthopedically challenged, not somebody who breaks a leg and it's going to be fixed, and students with multiple variations of those disabilities. So it's a pretty small group, but they're severe because their needs for educational support are more substantial than the general population by quite a bit. So it really does go on for several pages in the Education Code book, and there are over 14,000 pages in that book, just to give you a view. Okay, so basically when you're talking about an educational program, the setting is different depending on what the student's needs are. So sometimes it's in a self-contained classroom. Sometimes it's a mainstream situation, mainstream meaning you have general students and you have kids with special needs that are integrated in the classroom. And then there are also included programs where sometimes a specialist is pushed into the classroom to support, and or a paraprofessional is there to help make sure the students access the material in ways that are worthwhile for them. So assistive technology is kind of a special, unique definition as well. It really means any item, piece of equipment or product system, whether required commercially or with a need of modification, is modified or is customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of an individual with specialized needs. So basically what we're saying here is that this is not something that's going to be off the shelf for the most part. This is something that is designed specifically for different students and their specific needs. And that can be rather costly, and you can't just go out and buy a bunch of these for kids, because sometimes what works for one student is not what is going to work for another. And that brings us to some other definitions. The IEP, which some people think is not individualized education program, but individualized education plan. It used to be plan, it's now program, but because the program includes the services and the materials. So basically it's a contract between the parents of the child until they are of age, and then they get to make some of those decisions. But it's basically the family versus the school, and not verse, but in support of each other to help that student that has a special, unique needs. And it's the first word is the most important word of the whole three-word phrase, individualized. There is not a rubber stamp that says, oh, all of the kids that are under the autistic spectrum are going to get this set of materials and these teachers and these services. Because the word individualized means that even though it might be appropriate for more than one student and they can be pulled into a group because of needs that meet those needs, but the reality is that there's some things that are going to be different for some kids and not for others. The other thing is that it's a free, appropriate education, free, appropriate public education, that's FAPE. So that means that it's at no cost to the parents. Our community, our society it is important for us to take care of all of our individuals within that society. And so everything that is needed for the individual is taken care of at no cost. The next qualification is the least restrictive environment. And that means that you can't put kids in a classroom because they have special needs, and that's how things used to be. And actually, some kids years ago, if you were blind, you were taken from your parents and put into a home for the deaf and blind. Deaf, dumb, and blind actually at that time. That no longer happens. And then they started community-based programs. However, sometimes it goes too far the other way. And so the School for the Blind takes those students who typically have multiple disabilities and many challenges that a local school district, particularly a rural district, may not be able to handle. And so the School for the Blind, and we have 2 schools for the deaf, are there to accommodate the special needs of students who really need that more intense support. However, that they certainly, any school district is required to take care of the needs of the student. Sometimes if they only have one student, a neighboring district only has one student, they might collaborate and have the county form a program in classroom for them. Of the services that are available, some are more intense, like those for the low incidence population, but some of the kids have special needs that are invisible needs. You can't tell because they're learning disabled. Sometimes things don't work as well for them, even though they look like Joe classroom student. So these specialized materials and programs are set up for those kids who struggle at education, struggle at communication. And there's lots of ways to get there, but basically teachers start noticing the students just not grasping it. They're struggling more than they need to. And so either the parent or the teacher will request an assessment. The assessment basically says, here's where they are academically. And then with a psychologist test, they determine what is the potential for the student. And if it's more than a standard deviation, which is basically about 1.5 years, if the student is not aligned within 1.5 years of what their capabilities are, then they are eligible for support. And that support oftentimes comes in what I just finished saying, which is DIS services. That's designated instructional services. So they might work with a speech therapist. They might work with somebody on communication skills. They might work on organizational skills. But those things are all part of what the services include for the whole, to make the child whole. I'm going to talk about one specific disability that's becoming very, very prominent, and you've probably seen lots of news articles and webinars, and that's the whole concept of dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. There's all those things that make learning very difficult and challenging. And a lot of people thought, oh, those kids are just lazy. If they really stuck to it, they get it. But the reality is they have diagnosed dyslexia, and it occurs than we had originally thought. In fact, they say it may occur in as much as 12% of the population. Pretty amazing. Okay, so I'm going to barely go over transition services. Transition services, when a student turns 16, on their 16th birthday, already in place has to be what's called transition services. That means there has to be a plan for what are they going to do for the rest of their life. And that involves the student in as many ways as they possibly can. So depending on the student, that's going to happen. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was instruction in the alternative formats for those kids that cannot see a screen. So those are the Braille users, and for the most part, actually it includes a larger group than that, because there are a lot of kids that have neurologic disabilities that they can't focus on the screen. So these kids, most particularly the students that are Braille users though, someone has to figure out, how do they know what they know? How does a teacher determine if they are successful in academic areas? And so if they say, point to the triangle, if they're very early education, they're trying to differentiate shapes. But if the kid can't see the triangle, what are they going to use? So the alternative assessment, and that's what this presentation is really about, is the alternative accessible materials, the educational materials that are in a different format. That's where Braille and tactiles come in. So the teacher might have a hard copy of a Braille, or in Braille, or they could have a hard copy of triangles that have a piece of a manipulative, so they get the concepts of the triangle. But those are important to have. And there's a set of Braille standards that go all through the Common Core and determine how do you ask the questions to a student who is blind that you can't ask the same question because they can't see for the sighted students. So California is still working on their Braille standards, but there is one out there that's recognized across the country, and it's the Maryland Braille standards for both mathematics and English language arts. So if you Google Maryland Braille standards, it'll pop right up. So if you have any questions about a particular subject or concept or standard, you can go to those standards, and it'll show the teacher how to say or state a question so that the student can respond that can't see a screen or can't see the manipulatives or whatever it is that they're asked to do. One of the basic tenets of special education is accommodations. And the accommodations just mean they're getting the same material. No one's cheating. No one's giving anybody a head start. They're just simply accommodating by saying, let's make this in large print so the student doesn't have to squint or look at it on a larger device. Let's make this material in Braille so the students can read with their fingertips. Let's make the materials in audio so that they can follow along in improving their listening skills. And for those kids that have learning disabilities, very often the best technique is to see the words and hear the words at the same time, accessing two different parts of the brain with a greater chance for students to do better. So what we want to make sure to have happen in our schools is that parents are aware of their rights, and every time they go to an IEP, the back page of the IEP is typically pink, and it's multiple copies, but the back page goes to the parent. And it basically, that says, in this contract meeting between the school and the family, here are the things we are going to do for this individual student. And on the back of that are the procedural safeguards to make sure that they followed procedures set up in policy by the state and federal government that make sure that the student does have the rights to see and use all of the materials in an accessible format that are meaningful for them. So I'm not going to go through low incidence funding because I think that the ed code is there, and I included a lot of ed codes for you, particularly because I get questions all the time like, well, they won't buy this for the student. So I provided as many ed codes as I could to help justify materials for specific individual students. But if you, please use my name and contact information if you have questions on a specific case that you're having a difficult time with, and I'd be happy to help with. A lot of the ed codes that I provided are basically as information for you. But I do want to say that for those kids that reach the age of 16, and in many school districts at 14, there's a new law called WIOA. And it basically is a law that says we need to start transition earlier. And the WIOA law says that we have to give kids appropriate internships, chances, workability opportunities so that they can figure out what kind of career they want to go into. There's a lot of laws in that regards too, and I've included those, but I'm not going to use that in this presentation because that's a whole presentation in itself, and probably better people to get to that material than myself. The only last thing I wanted to cover was I wanted to talk about curriculum. There's basically a core curriculum, which is reading, language arts, science, history, social science. Those are the core subjects. There are other subjects that remember I mentioned local school districts, highlights. Some districts are very strong in the arts, very strong in physical education, very strong in the health education, and strong in foreign languages. But for the most part, the core subjects are the four main academics that I mentioned earlier. And what we try to do as a state is to make all materials that are adopted by the state board, which is all the core and ancillary subjects, accessible to students. So we provide these at no cost to the schools. We pay for the transcription, we pay for the large print, and we run what's called a clearinghouse out of a giant warehouse in West Sacramento. And we have an online ordering system called the Instructional Materials Distribution and Ordering System, IMODS. And anyone who works with qualified students can order materials for those special students, and they can get it in whatever accessible manner they want, including 4 different types of digital files. And that, again, at no cost. One of the things that's important if you are a district or a teacher or a parent and you're using materials that are not adopted by the State Board of Education, then what you need to do is make sure that someone has gone through a social compliance on these materials to make sure that there are not materials that are in any way biased or one way or the other, and make sure that they are culturally sensitive, because that's what the state does when they look at adopted materials. Not only does every single standard have to match in an adoption, but it also has to meet a high bar of social content standards. So it makes sure that they also include all types of kids, so kids of color, kids with disabilities, kids in many settings, many economic areas. So all of the materials should include all those different types of students because that's what California has, and including all those students who have English as a second language. One of the other laws that, before I switch over to the PowerPoint, is a law called sufficiency. What that means is that in the past, the reason this came about was teachers were having one set of algebra books, for example, and they had 6 high school classes that needed those books. So the students were able to use the books during class time, and they had no access to the classroom, to the book after class time, because the next group was going to use it. All the homework was sent on dittos, but they had no way to go back and review the chapter to see how it worked. So the law came about for sufficiency. That means that all students must have access to a book in school and the ability to have that same instructional materials available at home. So because we now have digital materials, that's much easier to do. Prior to that, each student was issued 2 books, one for class and one for home use. And that is a very expensive proposition, and it still exists in many districts today. And the law says that you can be fined significantly if a parent complains and you really don't have sufficient books. So it's important that school districts think ahead to make sure that there are enough books for all students, but with the digital content now that's available, it's a much easier way to get materials to the students. And I'm not going to go through anything else with Ed Code, but please, if you do have any questions about Education Code or any of the laws that pertain to Education Code, then please ask me those questions and I will guide you through that and get whatever information you might need for it. Back in 2006, actually 2004, when they reauthorized IDEA, they came up with a plan to require publishers to send in these files. Well, they decided to send it to a giant digital library. That's basically what this is. The National Instructional Materials Access Center is a digital library. All the materials from the publishers are required to submit all of their files, whether it's for a textbook, a workbook, or teacher materials, has to be set in according to a specific standard, the NIMAC standard, which basically is the National Instructional Materials Accessibility Standard. They have to separate all their files into text files and graphics files so that when they are reconfigured, depending on the student's needs, they can be done so. So I can take a text file and convert it to Braille. I can take a text file and convert it to text at different size fonts and different fonts themselves. I can take the graphic material and either provide alternate text, which means it tells me what is that picture, what is in that picture. And if it's a picture that, for example, is a graph or is a geometric figure, then there's a tool called the decision chart. If you go to casp.org and in the search box type decision chart, it will tell you by looking at a graphic, asking just a few questions, whether or not that should be given alternate text or should it have an actual tactile. A tactile means something you can actually feel. So if I'm blind and can't see the screen, and describing something isn't quite enough, especially in geometry or science or geography, perhaps I need to have something I can actually feel the structures and understand the code, or particularly if it's math and a graph, you're graphing on a chart on an X and Y axis, you need to know where those things are. So that decision chart is something that can be made accessible if you download the graphics file and convert it to the types of graphics that are meaningful for a student. Basically, if you are not familiar with what I've just talked about in terms of what is a graphic file, what does it mean to be a tactile, something you can touch, there is a wonderful list of FAQs, frequently asked questions, on the website at the website given there, on the screen there. And basically, they have a lot of PowerPoints too. As a principal, I was always looking for materials to talk to my staff about, so I might run a PowerPoint or I might show a short video, then have the staff discuss it, determine, do we really want to implement this in our school? If it's a thumbs up, then we talk about next steps. How are we going to do it? Is there a group that wants to be the leadership on this? And then we'll look at a timeline for how we're going to implement it. For example, we took the English Language Arts framework when it first came out in 2000, maybe 1998 rather, and we decided that our students were not performing well in writing. And so we took a whole school plan and decided to fix that plan. That was based on a short video that was produced during a summer workshop. And we showed that to the staff, and the staff said, yes, let's do something, because over and over again we heard about the writing. As it turns out, our scores jumped up 20% school-wide because of that writing. So it was really powerful. So I would definitely look at FAQs, because these are based on the experiences that people have had with the NIMAC and with the files, and they answer every question imaginable. And if they haven't, then just write to them and say, what about this? Here's where it gets a little bit tricky. The publishers are out to make money. They want to sell books and or now EPUBs, the digital files. And they want to make sure that you don't buy one copy and then share it with 20 other people. And so they want to make sure that only students that really have the qualifications and are eligible for these files get them. So the student has to have an IEP. That's like the high benchmark. And they have to have a qualifying disability. So for example, if I'm a learning disabled student and I do better when I hear it and see it, that's not considered a qualifying disability in strict interpretation by NIMAC. Now local decisions can change that, but I can't speak to local decisions. So basically the NIMAC wants to make sure that the people are qualified to receive this and that no one else is going to receive this file, because that was one of the deals that the publishers made with the federal government if they're going to provide these files at no cost. Now when you get to the NIMAC, it's a wonderful site. It's very easy to navigate. It's totally accessible for all populations. But one of the things you're going to do is, how do I search for materials? Now, you can't actually get the materials from the NIMAC, but you can search them. So for example, you have an ISBN. That's the number on the back of the book that looks like it's something from that you scan in when you're buying the book, but there's usually a 10 or 13-digit number. And so if it's 10, it could start with any number at all. If it's 13, it always starts with 978. And so if you look in the back of the book and you put that ISBN in the book, oftentimes it will show up. However, if it doesn't show up by just putting the numbers in, then you can put in a title. And there are lots of different pages, and I'll show you in a minute what the NIMAC search page of options is. Now, anyone can search, but as the directions here talk to, each state has what's called a NIMAC coordinator. That's the one person that's overseeing everything in the state that has to do with the files that are in the repository, who gets permission. Now, under the state coordinator are 5 to 6 people who have the authority to download the files. Now, some of these are school districts. Some of these are people in state offices. For example, the librarian at the California Institute for the Blind is one of the authorized users. I have, State of California has given permission to BOOKSHARE and to Learning Ally, back when it was Recordings for the Blind and Dyslexic. They have permission to enter the files for the NIMAC and have permission to download. Once you've downloaded the files, let's say you're a student in Fred's school, and you have a student that needs a Braille file of a particular book. You know it's in the NIMAC because you searched and you found it there, but you can't get the actual file. So you would approach either the state or one of the authorized users, if you know who they are, and say, I need this file. So the authorized user would go to the NIMAC with their login, download the file, and give it to you. Let's say you are the district accessibility paraprofessional. And so you're going to take the book and make it into a Braille file, or you're going to take that book and make it use it as a digital file, combine it so that it can be used on a laptop or a mobile phone or some other device. There are literally hundreds of devices now that didn't exist. So you can put that on for the student. Now remember, these files are not student ready because the publishers were told to break them up into the text files and the graphic files. So if you were to try to give the student just a downloaded file without converting it, it would be very confusing for the student. There would be no formatting. The pictures would be immersed anywhere with the text. So it doesn't work. So you can have professionals do that, or you can do it yourself. There are a lot of free software out there that convert books for you. But I want to move ahead and show you a little bit more about the NIMAC. Now this page, if you can't find the ISBN, and on this screen in the middle is the word or the letters ISBN are circled, and then there's a highlighted bar. That's where you'd put that. If, for example, it doesn't come up, it says no book available, then I would suggest you looking at the title and or author, a publisher. The more information, remember there are over 80,000 books in this repository, the NIMAC, and it's growing exponentially every day. So chances are it might be there under that title, but perhaps a different publisher. For example, Where the Red Fern Grows, a very popular book for 5th or 6th grade, might be published by 6 different publishers and 10 different school publishers. But the text is going to be the same as the author's words. It might have different book cover and different numbers of words on a page, but the book is going to be the same. So you're getting the same book, so you take whatever they have. Sometimes you have to look at the editions, particularly with science and math books. If you get the wrong edition, you're going to have a different page and a different set of problems for the students to solve. So you have to be careful of that. But sometimes the ISBN isn't read. When you do find an ISBN in the NIMAC, it will list every ISBN that is the exact same book, because some states have their own state publisher rights, particularly since before Common Core, every state had their own. It might be listed under Illinois, but Illinois chose not to change any of the text, and so it's the same text. So you have a different ISBN because it's for that state. So you might have anywhere from 1 to 8 ISBNs that all mean the same book. And if it does have if the one you need comes up, you're guaranteed that the text is the same. I went through a little bit of this between what an authorized user and AMP is. An AMP is a professional that basically produces materials for students. So it could be a company, it could be somebody in your district office, it could be someone in your school that is responsible for getting materials in accessible formats for the students. Remember, there's lots of different file formats and lots of different ways to get materials to students. File conversion is probably the most important part. There's Braille files, text files, digital accessible information system, DAISY. That's a particular kind of file that if you have a device that has a DAISY player inside, it works really well. PDF documents, there are 5 different kinds of PDF documents. Only one of them is readable by a screen reader. Screen readers for those people who cannot see the text, so they need to have their text read to them. But unfortunately, Adobe only has one PDF that works through that. However, there are some people, pretty clever hackers out there, that have found workarounds for PDF so that it does read. And so if you need it in a PDF format, make sure you're looking at a format that is accessible. And then EPUB is probably the most common. The reason it's most common is because publishers can now put a number on the book that is read, so that if I'm downloading a book for a student, it goes only to that student. If that student tries to transfer it to another computer, the whole file goes with them, and the student that had it originally no longer has it. So they try to keep that constant so that you can't use one file for more than one student. And it's, again, publisher rights. They're out to make money like everyone else. So it basically tracks that. If you're, for example, you have an Apple computer or laptop and it fries, it totally goes down, then you can bring that EPUB back on a new device, and you haven't lost it. You don't have to pay for it again, but because it has a unique number for that student. The problem with downloading some of the files from the NIMAC is they're quite large. I know I tried to send some files to a teacher, and it was 2 gigabytes. 2 gigabytes is over 100,000 bits of information. And so lots of school districts have a wall of 50,000, not 500,000. And if it gets beyond that, it just strips the file away. If it has too many graphics, the district policy is that it won't let graphic files go through because they're afraid people are downloading too many inappropriate sites, whether they're YouTube or things that are non-educational, and so things with graphics they just strip out. So firewalls are sturdy for a reason, but sometimes if you work with your IT people, you can say, I'm expecting this file to come in for this student. Please let it through, and then they can. So one of the things we have to look about is there are an awful lot of viruses. I put this graphic of Y2K because for those of you who were around when it was 1999 and about to turn 2000, everyone thought, well, not everyone, a lot of people thought that all the computers would be destroyed. There was an internal virus that was just going to make them all implode or explode. Nothing happened, but you have to be aware of viruses that can get into your software and your hardware. So be very careful when talking to students about downloading books to their devices, that they're careful not to take in unwanted software which could compromise their textbooks. Nowadays, in the last 5 years, things are absolutely exploding, and as of just a couple of weeks ago, you can now get your textbooks on a watch. So things are dramatically changing. There's so many new software tools, so many hardware options, that for every disability there are literally multitudes of information. And so it's important to, when you're working with a student, to always assess the kids. What is it they can do and what is it they can't do? Start with that accessibility assessment that determines what are the needs, and then try to find tools that match that. Instead of saying, oh, well, let's give everybody an iPad. iPads do everything. Well, they don't, and some kids don't work well with an iPad. So I'm not saying the iPad is bad. I think it's a great tool, but make sure it's aligned with the needs of the individual. That said, there are probably, in blindness alone, 500,000 apps that are being developed and or have been developed. One of the tools you might want to look at is if you look at disability populations. In blindness, you could look at a website under the Braille Institute on a sub-site called VIA, and it's basically a tool reviewer. It looks at all the apps in the field of blindness, and it reviews them. And they get no money from the people that create these tools or any money for charging people to have them reviewed. They simply do it as a service to look at the tool, and they rate it from 1 to 5. How accessible is it? How easy is it to use? Is it at the right appropriate age and or grade level? So I would encourage you to look at that tool, and every disability population has a similar website that talks to that specific population about the apps that are for them. And if you go to, for example, the National Federation for the Blind, which is on the screen, they will talk about all the products that are available and accessible for people that are blind or have low vision. So there's just a changing mood, and these things are constantly in flux because of new devices that are even more accessible than the previous generation. If you can't find something in the NIMAC, then I would encourage you to, if you're in California, to contact the our unit. And if you look at the email address, csmt@cde.ca.gov, that email address is where you would send a request for a file. You've looked in the NIMAC repository, you've looked at other repositories, and you just can't find it. So you'd look there, and that would be very helpful. Another great source is BOOKSHARE. BOOKSHARE used to charge about $175 per person, and now it's free. It basically gives each individual that is qualified, remember, has a print disability, free access to thousands and thousands of files. So it's a free membership, and once a student gets the membership, it is their membership, not the teacher's membership. So it's an excellent service. I must say, though, if you are a student who is, or you know of a student who is blind, their files are not formatted, so a student doesn't know what's a heading, what's a sidebar, what's text. So whoever is working in that district to make it transcribable formatted, they're going to have to do a lot of work with that file, but at least it provides you one step closer to getting materials for the students, just as information. I would probably, for the students that I know that are blind, prefer to go to NIMAC and get a full file, put it on a device that they can use and access that's already fully formatted without having to go to a BRF or a Braille file, and then simply make a collection of all the graphics that they're going to need with tactiles. Just a suggestion. Okay, I kind of rushed through the end part of that. I have one more piece before we get to the questions, and I'm going to tap into Rosemarie. If you can take us to the AIM website, please. I'm going to take you on the, remember this used to be called, when it first opened, it was called the Accessible Instructional Materials. And again, it's changed to Accessible Educational Materials. And the website, there's going to be a list of websites that has already been sent to you, but if you came later, you can access that. And it's a whole listing of the different things that I'm going to take you through. Basically, this is a site that tells you to learn how you can learn more about accessible educational materials. If we could go to the next one, please. And this is actually a website that's put out by the state of Georgia. They just didn't put a lot of fluff and information all around it, so I really like it. And basically it talks about accessible materials, and the part that I like is up at the very top. And I scrolled up on their website, and basically it's a definition of an assistive technology. Now, assistive technology is some of the information that went through with you with education code. But if you click on the device, it talks about exactly what I had said before about the device. So it talks about any item, piece of equipment, or product system, etc., that helps students. And a service means a person providing a service to that student. Might be a speech therapist, might be the psychologist, might be occupational therapy for the student, all kinds of people that are providing interventions that support that student. So it's a really concise way of getting to what the students need, and I just like their website. There's one for the federal government and a lot of EduCode, but sometimes it gets a little too wordy. If we can go to the next one, please. All about AIM. Years ago, there was a grant from an organization called CAST that received a giant grant to talk about accessibility and education, education birth to death, basically. And so they created this center. And it's now, as you see the top, it says Accessible Instructional Materials, but if you look in the blue bar just below it, it's still the AIM Center, A-I-M. So they're still in the process of changing some of this. This is a really good website, and it goes into great depths, a bunch of FAQs that have been found to be the most important pieces of AIM and what students can count on and what the law says are required for students. So if we can go to the next one, it says what are AIM, and I believe I can probably get there. Okay, got there just easily this way. And it talks about what are the aims, and basically it talks about universal design for learning. It talks about the kinds of materials that can be provided. Again, large print, Braille, audio, digital text. Those are the ways that students can access materials that help them to get the same information as their peers. Now what they do with it is just the same as anyone else. You can, the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So at least it tells you the kinds of things that are available in AIM and what we're talking about when it says, well, let's make them into an accessible format. So those are the main accessible formats. The web is gigantic now. And if I go on the side of this and I click on Use, it's going to get me to the types of things that are used in AIM to help people. It talks about the technology that's needed. So not only do you have to choose which device is best matching the kid's needs, but you have to talk about how do we train the student, how do we train the teacher, how do we train the family to be able to use that device effectively, especially if they're new to this device. I can tell you, if you are a student and you're past 3rd grade, I would go to YouTube. Once you get a device, go to YouTube. There are other students who have made amazing YouTube presentations on how to unbox it, how to use it, how to pair it with different Wi-Fi systems. So that's available, but you do have to think in terms of how am I going to train? How's the school district going to put in the contract, the IEP, how the training is going to take place? What instructional strategies are going to be used? How am I as a teacher going to help this student with these materials and this device? So that's what the teacher really needs to look at. What support services may be needed. So for example, if it's Braille, I'm going to have somebody who can transcribe daily assignments that might not come from a book. Accommodations and modifications. I think most of the people attending are pretty well immersed in education, but accommodation means the same material in a different format. A modification means that I'm going to take that material and change it. I might be scaffolding it, which means breaking it down into little pieces. I might be summarizing the paragraphs. Instead of having the student read a paragraph, we're going to get a summary of the paragraph. Here's what it's about, and then read the paragraph so I have a heads up of what to look for so I can increase my comprehension of what's going on. And so this website talks pretty much what I had just finished saying, but the Supports for Use is a really important place to get information. Okay, let's go to decision, which I think I can get that from here. Okay, decisions. Okay, I can't stress enough that if you've got a student that's struggling, first you're going to try different things, moving them to a better place in the classroom, making it so that there are fewer distractions, maybe looking at trying to get a tape that goes along with it. So basically what we're looking at is trying to find ways that work for all students that have struggles. But if it seems more than that, then we have to determine if the student does have special needs that are quantifiable enough so the student qualifies for services and or specialized materials. Once we've made the decision that that's going to happen, then we need to determine what are those materials, what are those services that they're going to be needing. And so if we can go to the one, if you look at decision-making tools and supports, there's a wonderful tool called AIM Navigator. And basically, this really takes you through the decisions as a team. Let's say you have a student that has multiple disabilities and you're not sure what's going to work for this student because they have so many unique needs that it's going to be different to pull together the right materials, the right services that are going to really meet the needs of this student. So the AIM Navigator is basically a tool that walks you through this process for each student. And it's a really simple tool to use. It was developed for teachers and for parents at the same time. So it's a tool that's really good. The AIM Explorer, which is another tool, talks about all the different kinds of digital tools that are available, including text-to-speech, how to do the kinds of accommodations and accessibility features that are built into many devices, certainly all computers, how to have contrast coloring, how to change the font. You can select all and change the font. Particularly with students that have dyslexia, there is a font called the dyslexia font, and you can get that from the internet. It is helping about 85% of the kids who are dyslexic to better able to focus on the reading, because with dyslexia sometimes it's hard to see what's actually printed in front of you. So the dyslexia font works for about 85% of those students. But this AIM Explorer helps you with all the many possibilities. Remember I told you there's really thousands and thousands of apps out there, so it's hard to know them all, hard to know even all the software. And the AIM Guide to AMPS basically talks about who are the people that create these different types of materials. And that's what's something you have to go to, because you may not have somebody in your district or your school or homeschool even that isn't able to provide these accessible materials, and you can't do it. So it gives you a place. Here's where a list of people who are recognized in the field to be able to provide these formats. If we can go to the next one, please. Okay, if you look at the top for California, Lori Garcia is the person in California that is the NIMAC coordinator. So she is the person that if you didn't use the CSMT at cde.ca.gov to ask your questions, she's the person you can send information to, and she can find somebody in her staff that can get that information for you. So I would encourage you to keep that contact information as well, and it's in one of the handouts. So we're going to leave the internet and go back to the PowerPoint with that last slide that shows questions. And I'd like to open it up to anyone who might have a question that I might be able to answer at this time.
Question from Allison Hetland. She said, what about students with severe orthopedic impairment so they can't hold a book or turn the page independently?
That's a really good question, because a lot of kids can't turn the page for a multitude of reasons, and there are a lot of new switches that have been developed so that the student can use it if they have any power in their hands and or headgear that can move the pages for them. And that was probably the one thing that really was wonderful. And it was developed, I think, at around 2009, and that the headgear started coming into play where students could actually, in a wheelchair, use their heads to move things forward and turn the pages on their own instead of waiting for someone to do that for them. There is new wonderful eye gaze technology, so students can type almost as fast as you and I might be able to type with their fingers using just their eyes. They can also turn pages with their eyes with directions from the eye gaze technology. So there are a lot of options that were kind of experimental a few years ago and now are pretty much mainstream. So lots of things out there. There's another question here that talks about materials eligible for NIMAC, and there's BOOKSHARE wondering about other resources for electronic files. Learning Ally is another one of those organizations that has that. They're independently funded. They don't have a grant from the government, so they do charge a fee for their services. And I can't remember exactly what it is now. At one time it was $175 per student, but I think they've reduced that significantly because of donors. But I would check in Learning Ally. Most of their materials are human narrated, as opposed to most digital files are synthetic voice narrated. Most of them are pretty good, but still a synthetic voice is a synthetic voice. And even with human voice, sometimes if you're blind, it doesn't make sense and you need to refresh it so that the Braille pops up and you can read it with your fingers. Another source I would always encourage you to look is a website from the American Printing House for the Blind. When you click on that, you're going to look at Louie. Now, no, it's not a dance option. The Louie is a database of people that provide accessible materials. So you put in, once you click on Louie, and particularly if you go to Louie Plus, you can put in a title or an ISBN, and it'll show everybody in the United States that provides that file, and it tells you what kinds of formats they provide. Some do large print, some do Braille, some audio, and some will just, they'll contract with you for anything. But it tells you who has already completed that material. So that's an excellent source, the Louie database. There are lots of other databases that have electronic files. If you go to the web and just click in the title and book, sometimes it mostly gives you publisher material, but there are some new websites surfacing. I haven't accessed them, so I don't want to give them out without me looking at them, but there are other places if you Google it, so that'll be good. With no further questions, I guess we'll call this an end. I want to thank you all. Please use my contact information that is on the screen and is on the handouts, and contact me with any questions you might have. Basically, my job is to serve you. You're the ones that are face-to-face with the students, and I really miss that, but I'm here to help you, to support you in the work that you do for the students, and I really appreciate all that you do for them. Thank you.